simulation is nearing the end. I think the simulation is drawing to a close, though I want to clarify that I'm not basing this feeling on a single evento. That recent shooting, tragic as it was, felt more like the cherry on top of a long-standing global order rather than the main catalyst. It's almost as if we've been spiraling downward for a while, tied up in greed, power struggles, and a stubborn refusal to follow genuine leadership. Now, whether this downward trajectory is truly an ending or just a pivot point in a much larger cosmic timeline is something I can't definitively say, but my gut tells me that something is shifting, that some culminating point is on the horizon. I also want to make it clear that when I speak of endings, I'm not claiming to know precisely how or when they'll occur. The universe, or multiverse, or however you want to define it, is vast beyond our comprehension. We could be looking at another 5,000 years, or maybe it's already happening in ways we can't fully perceive. Ending doesn't have to mean a sudden cataclysmic event. It could be more like a graceful fade-out, one reality dissolving into another, almost the way you move from sleep to wakefulness, or from one dream to the next eye. That's the thing about the idea of a simulation. It expands the possibilities of what an end might look like. An end might not even be the right word. My understanding is that we are in just one of infinite versions of a grand simulation. Sometimes I imagine reality as a dense forest, each simulation a different tree, each tree riddled with branches, timelines, possibilities, entire worlds. In one version, human beings emerged, flourished for a while, and then perished, largely because of their own short-sightedness. Greed and the inability to rally around meaningful leadership seem to be common themes in our history, from ancient empires to modern times. It's like a fatal flaw that runs through our collective psyche. Meanwhile, there are countless other simulations that don't include Earth at all, where the parameters for life, if life is even the correct term, are entirely unrecognizable to us. Maybe in some of those simulations, there's a more harmonious outcome. Maybe others never had a planet-based civilization, or even a concept of time we'd recognize. Because these alternate realities could be so different, it's humbling to consider that we may be just one minuscule speck in an ocean of infinite possibilities. We tend to think of ourselves as pivotal, as though our story must be the central drama in the universe. Yet, if reality is indeed structured as a vast array of simulations, each branching out in endless directions, we might be a footnote, or even just a line of code in a sprawling cosmic experiment. That realization doesn't have to be depressing. It can actually be liberating. If we're not the be-all and end-all, maybe that frees us from some sense of inflated importance and gives us room to explore, question, and evolve. Question and evolve. We don't have to carry the entire cosmos on our shoulders. We're part of a tapestry so immense it defies comprehension. Sometimes I wonder if anyone can snap out of this simulation, the way you might abruptly wake from a dream. It's the classic philosophical question. Could there be some radical shift in consciousness where we suddenly see reality for what it truly is? And if we did, what would that look like? Would it be an instant dissolution of the physical world around us? Or would it be more like peeling back layers of a painting until you see the canvas underneath? On occasion, I've had moments of eerie clarity, glitches in the matrix, if you will, when the world seems strangely malleable or too perfectly orchestrated to be random. But those moments are fleeting. Before I know it, I'm back to my ordinary perceptions, worried about rent, daily news, and whether I need to buy groceries. The truth is, I'm not saying I know anything for certain. I'm not religious, and I don't claim to have special insight. If anything, I'm just a curious mind trying to piece together the puzzle from fragments of intuition and observation. This is one of many possibilities. Non-discrete, infinite possibilities, to be precise. In fact, it's hard to talk about the concept of infinity without resorting to paradox. To say infinite suggests there is no beginning or end, but at the same time, we speak of certain points as if they are terminal. Maybe that contradiction is built into the very structure of our understanding. Or maybe language simply isn't equipped to handle concepts like this with complete accuracy. When I say I believe there are infinite simulations and that ours is approaching some kind of conclusion, I don't necessarily mean apocalypse or doomsday. I envision the end as something subtler, maybe a metamorphosis, a shift in the code that forms our reality. This could happen tomorrow or millennia from now, and I'm not defining exactly what that ending entails. Could it be mass extinction, a sudden jump in human evolution, a quiet merging with another realm, even a slow fade into cosmic oblivion? Our biggest mistake might be assuming the end must be grand and Hollywood-worthy. Reality has a funny way of defying our expectations, often leaning towards subtlety where we crave spectacle. We're so full of certainty sometimes, quick to dismiss unusual ideas or brand them as conspiracy theories. Yet, if we're indeed in a simulation, almost any notion about what's real or possible might be up for grabs. The lines between science, spirituality, and myth might blur, revealing deeper layers that don't neatly fit into categories we've created. We live in a world where quantum physics already suggests phenomena that contradict everyday intuition. Particles that exist in multiple states, entangled pairs that share information instantaneously, wave-particle dualities, and so on. Wave-particle dualities, and so on. If the fundamental building blocks of our universe behave so bizarrely, why would the overarching framework be bizarre as well? In many ways, the presence of anger or resistance in discussions about this topic is understandable. Talking about the potential end of a reality, one we've invested so much in, can spark fear, denial, or outright hostility. Nobody wants to think that everything they've fought for, loved, or built might be ephemeral, subject to deletion or transformation by forces beyond our control. But if you're not comfortable with these ideas, there's no obligation to engage with them. Everyone has their own threshold for existential wonder or dread. Personally, I find it invigorating to consider these possibilities, even if they're unsettling. It's like mental skydiving. You leap into the unknown just to see what it feels like. I do admit there's an inherent paradox in believing we might be at the cusp of a grand finale, yet also suspecting we have little control over it. If it's all code, all predetermined or spontaneously generated by some cosmic mainframe, what can we do? On a human level, we try to govern ourselves, follow leaders, often the wrong ones, and chase after better tomorrows. But maybe the simulation's code includes the inevitability of corruption, conflict, and short-sighted governance. Perhaps these elements are not flaws but features, lessons built into the system for us to navigate. Alternatively, maybe we're failing the test, and the system is on the verge of a reboot. The idea that humans existed and perished in this particular branch due to greed and the inability to unite under strong leadership rings disturbingly true. If we look at our history, we see countless empires and civilizations that rose to greatness only to collapse from within. Greed, corruption, betrayal. These threads are woven into our collective past. From ancient Mesopotamia to modern superpowers, the pattern repeats. Perhaps in a parallel simulation, we overcame those pitfalls and achieved a golden age of equitable governance and sustainable living. In that reality, war, poverty, and environmental destruction might be relics of a barbaric past. But here, in this version, we're still grappling with primal impulses, advanced technology, and the reckless quest for dominance. Now, consider the possibility that we are just one simulation among many that doesn't even feature Earth. If we took away Earth, humanity, and everything we know, that leaves an inconceivable range of other conditions. Can we even fathom existence without time, space, or recognizable matter? What if some simulations are purely energetic or fundamentally based on consciousness alone? It's fascinating to think that somewhere, in another version of existence, what we call a day doesn't mean anything because there's no sun, no planet, no continent, no concept of diurnal rhythm. Or maybe there's a form of life that experiences decades in what amounts to our second. Endless permutations exist if you accept the infinite simulation theory. I'm not here to convert anyone or insist that my viewpoint is correct. I'm just sharing a perspective that resonates with me at this moment. It's entirely possible that I'm wrong, that this reality is the only one, that we're on a linear path from creation to destruction, and that the end will be final. Or maybe there's something else entirely going on, something that neither the simulation argument nor standard religious doctrine can fully capture. After all, humans have a long history of grappling with existential mysteries, often constructing elaborate belief systems to answer the unanswerable. Yet even our most refined theories can feel like child's play next to the immensity of the cosmos. If I'm being honest, I sometimes hope that a single person can indeed wake up from the dream. Wouldn't it be extraordinary if someone learned how to exit the simulation or gain mastery over its code? Not in a messianic sense, but more like an explorer pushing the boundaries of known experience. Imagine the revelations they'd bring back, the perspective shifts they'd offer. We have stories and myths about enlightened beings, prophets, or advanced spiritual masters who seem to operate on a higher plane of understanding. Could they be the ones who have caught glimpses of the underlying architecture? Or are they just especially attuned to the illusions we all live under? Another angle is that maybe the entire community of consciousness within this simulation has the potential for collective awakening. If enough of us realize we're in a simulation, would that trigger a shift in the code? Could the end of the simulation be more of a mass transcendence than a catastrophic meltdown? There's a certain poetry in imagining that, rather than going out in flames, we dissolve into a higher state of awareness, a cosmic graduation of sorts. Then again, that might just be wishful thinking. History suggests humanity doesn't often unite in peace and love unless there's a dire threat forcing us to cooperate. Even then, our unity can be short-lived. I admit, sometimes I do sense a closing-in feeling like the walls of our shared reality are tightening. It's subtle. Maybe it's the barrage of global crises, or perhaps it's just me interpreting headlines through a specific lens. But from pandemics to social unrest, from climate change to mass shootings, it often feels like we're barreling towards something. The older generation saw plenty of turmoil in their time too. But it's the speed of our modern chaos that strikes me. Information flows so quickly that events in one corner of the globe instantly reverberate everywhere else. The pace feels unsustainable, as though the simulation is accelerating toward a critical juncture. And yet, each day life goes on. We still have families, jobs, entertainment, and mundane routines. People are still falling in love, raising children, and planning for a future that might not be guaranteed. That's the paradox of living in an uncertain reality. We must navigate the tension between existential dread and the daily comforts that make life worth living. Perhaps that's why the concept of a simulation is both intriguing and terrifying. It calls into question all the structures we rely on: governments, cultures, relationships, even the laws of physics, implying that they could be ephemeral. But ephemeral doesn't automatically mean meaningless. Even if we're code, that code can generate experiences of love, joy, and connection that feel profoundly real to us. Sometimes I think about how many stories, myths, and legends depict a great ending. Ragnarok, Armageddon, Kali Yuga, or even the more modern fantasies about aliens or zombies. They all revolve around an apocalyptic shift. In some myths, the world is reborn afterward. In others, the world simply ends. If these stories recur across cultures and epochs, maybe they're reflections of a deep-seated intuition that all realities, no matter how stable they seem, eventually transform or conclude. One culture's prophecy could be another culture's glitch in the matrix. If everything is cyclical, the concept of finality might be an illusion. One loop ends, another begins. That cyclical viewpoint aligns with the idea of infinite simulations, each an iteration that may or may not remember what came before. Whether or not we're near the end, I personally find it healthier to remain curious rather than fearful. Curiosity opens doors to conversation, exploration, and creative problem-solving. Fear closes them. If indeed we're approaching some grand finale or shift, perhaps we can meet it with a spirit of inquiry rather than panic. Even if we can't change the outcome, we can change our attitude toward it. If the simulation is code, then maybe the consciousness within the code matters. Maybe it shapes how that code runs, how it evolves, and how, or when, it concludes. In that sense, you could argue that even acknowledging the possibility of a simulation can subtly alter the simulation itself, like a self-referential system that adapts once it's observed. So, when I say, I think the simulation is nearing its end, I don't necessarily want to paint a picture of doom. I'm suggesting that we might be on the threshold of something different. That difference could be large-scale upheaval, a cosmic change in the environment, or a shift in our collective mindset. It could also be so gentle that most people never notice until long after it's done. The timeline is fuzzy. Ending could be thousands of years away, or it could be next week. The truth is, I don't know. And I'm wary of those who claim absolute certainty about it. History is littered with failed prophecies from people who were sure the end was nigh. Now, about this sub and the people in it. I know these thoughts can ignite strong reactions. Some find them fascinating. Others find them ridiculous or irritating. That's all good. We each gravitate toward ideas that resonate with us. If this doesn't resonate with you, there's no obligation to stick around. Write your own post. Shape your own perspective. That's the beauty of open forums and the free exchange of ideas. Everyone is free to present their angle. Anger often arises when people feel their core worldview is threatened, which is understandable. We cling to what we think we know. But for me, exploring the simulation concept is not about discrediting anyone's worldview. It is about considering alternatives that might stretch my own. I also realize some might say, if you think it's all code, why bother with anything? My response is that, code or not, we're here, experiencing something that at least feels real. We have relationships, art, laughter, and heartbreak. We learn and grow, stumble and succeed. Whether we're living out a predetermined script or co-creating the world with every choice, it still matters how we treat each other. Even if everything is ultimately an illusion, the impact we have on one another in the here and now can't just be dismissed. Code or no code, kindness has real consequences. Someone feels less alone, less hurt. That counts, at least to me. One of the most captivating possibilities is that an end might simply be a gateway to a new beginning, like a seamless transition from one simulation to another. Imagine if, at the moment of collapse or fade out, we barely notice the shift. Suddenly, the rules of physics might change a bit, or the social structures we've taken for granted might rearrange themselves. Maybe we'd chalk it up to an evolutionary step, or label it as a spiritual ascension, or dismiss it as a glitch. Think about how certain historical leaps have felt almost magical in hindsight. The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the digital age. Each was, in its own way, a radical transformation of the world's operating system. Now imagine that multiplied by a cosmic factor of 1,000,000. As I mention these possibilities, I'm not doing so to claim I've had a revelation or a vision. I'm simply letting my mind wander across the cosmic chessboard, picturing different moves and outcomes. Some might call it daydreaming or speculation, but I see it as an important mental exercise, one that keeps us open-minded and imaginative. After all, nearly every major breakthrough in science or philosophy started as a hypothesis that sounded outlandish at first. The idea of the Earth revolving around the sun once threatened to upend the established order. Why should the simulation idea be so quickly dismissed? Perhaps it will turn out to be an incomplete metaphor. Or maybe, centuries down the line, it will be regarded as an obvious truth. In the meantime, we go on living. We watch the news, engage in politics, pay our bills, and occasionally get lost in existential pondering about what lies beneath it all. The possibility that we're a speck in an infinite field of simulations doesn't necessarily negate the value of our experiences. On the contrary, it can lend them a certain poignancy, a fragile beauty that arises from recognizing how fleeting everything might be. If the simulation is nearing its end, each moment becomes more precious, each connection more meaningful. And really, maybe the greatest lesson in all of this is that it's okay not to know. Embracing uncertainty can be oddly comforting. We don't have to box ourselves into a rigid worldview. We can entertain the notion of multiple simulations, timelines, endings, and beginnings, without demanding concrete proof or offering unconditional belief. This middle ground of curiosity is a liberating place to be, a space where wonder thrives. So, here we stand, on the precipice of what may or may not be a cosmic shift. We might be nearing a grand finale, or we might just be swirling through another chapter in an unending story. Perhaps the end is an illusion, and reality is more like a Mobius strip, looping back into itself endlessly. We can't definitively say, but if you're inclined to think about these things, don't let naysayers crush that curiosity. Ideas, even speculative ones, are the seeds of growth. If you find the notion that this simulation is nearing its end compelling, or if you find it absurd, that's perfectly fine. Write your own exploration, critique, or expansion. The conversation itself is part of what keeps us human, or code-based consciousness, depending on your perspective. In closing, I'll reiterate that I'm not offering predictions or prophecies here. I'm floating a theory, a scenario that resonates with my intuition at times. We exist in one of infinite versions of a grand simulation, and this particular version might be wrapping up, or might simply be evolving into something new. Whether it's 5,000 years from now or 5 minutes from now, I can't say. We might fade into an adjacent reality, or we might see a dramatic finale. If you ask me to define the moment of transition, I can't. If you ask me what happens afterward, I don't know. But that doesn't make the inquiry any less fascinating. Ultimately, the beauty of exploring such ideas is that it opens our minds to the vastness of possibility. If there are indeed infinite simulations, then our petty squabbles and obsessions may be less significant than we imagine. That realization could either lead us to nihilism, or, paradoxically, inspire us to live more fully, more creatively, and more compassionately. For my part, I choose the latter. Because if this ride is coming to an end, I'd at least like to enjoy the journey, reflect on its mysteries, and maybe even share a few thoughts with fellow travelers along the way. If that resonates with you, stick around and keep the conversation going. If not, there's an entire universe of other topics to explore, and that too is exactly as it should be.